We'll be back in a second, Vicky. What I'd like to do is to just be joined by two observers who may have different views maybe on the message delivered there by the new Prime Minister, leader writer at the Observer newspaper, Sonia Sodha, and the former advisor to David Cameron, Laura Trott. Thank you both for joining us. Laura, first of all, can I start with you and ask you what you made of that initial statement by the new Prime Minister?
Well, I think that Boris Johnson showed no dilution in his doubling down on the 31st of October. So kind of a very strong focus on Brexit, and as Vicky said, a very strong personal accountability for what he's trying to do. So he's trying to draw a clear demarcation from the approach that Theresa May took in terms of leaving a lot of the negotiations to civil servants. But also it was a very conservative domestic agenda, talking about infrastructure, talking about taxation, a very strong pro-business message as well, which I think will strike well with many of the supporters and actually indeed the MPs in the House.
Sonia, what was your take on it?
So I thought it was incredibly light on detail. We heard this morning from Matt Hancock that this was going to be a speech rich in detail. It just wasn't there. I think on Brexit, it was devoid of any detail. It was Boris Johnson continuing to sort of live in fantasy land, saying that he can strike a new deal, there aren't going to be any problems for the Irish border, and if not, we'll leave with no deal. So I think that's why, as Vicky said just before, there will be a lot of question marks. There are still big question marks hanging over, well, what is Boris Johnson's actual Brexit strategy, and are we going to get any clarity on that over the next few days and weeks? The other thing I think is that really struck me was we had a lot of heavy briefing about social care. There was going to be a sort of a big announcement, a big commitment there. Now, we had some rhetoric around that, again, like the rhetoric with Brexit, but essentially Boris Johnson was saying, I'm going to fix this and I've got a plan and you're just going to have to trust me on that. That was no further detail. So it was a very typically Boris Johnson type speech for me. It was heavy on rhetoric, very, very light on detail and quite rambly in places, and it almost sounded like, it was a bit off the cuff, to be honest.
I disagree with that.
Can you both stay with us? Do you mind? And sorry to interrupt. I'll be back with you in a moment because I've just been joined by Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor. And Laura, that was quite long. There was a lot of energy in it. It was, pointing us in some domestic directions too.
Yep.
What did you make of it?
Well, I think, as you suggest, Boris Johnson, in a funny way, tried to do what Theresa May did when she moved in here, is say, look, I know I'm here to sort out Brexit, but by the way, here are a list of the other things that I know you, the country, care about, and I promise I'm going to do my very best to fix them. However, it's clear Boris Johnson knows the reason that he has managed to win power now is because of his role in the Brexit campaign, because of the promise he made to Tory party members about sticking to that Halloween deadline. And, I'm not sure how loud it was for our viewers at home, but here in Downing Street, all the way through that statement, you could hear not just protests from anti-Brexit protesters, but also real heated arguments between pro-Brexit and anti-Brexit people out there on Whitehall. Now, they may not be small in number, but if you like, that's a metaphor for how difficult and how choppy things are going to be. And they're very well aware, as the new number 10 team probably, looks around the offices wondering where they're all going to sit, how they're going to do. They're very well aware that this is a very precarious political time, but I think the chanting at the gates would have been a reminder.
Symbolic. He was clear again. 31st of October, as you say. He came back and he said, no exceptions. We'll be out by that time. Is he saying that because, as he said, the preparations will have been done for no deal, or what is the purpose in terms of the strategy of getting people together in Parliament of being so precise on that again?
I think the big picture, actually, for Boris Johnson and his supporters is that the failure to leave 3 years after the referendum has done, in their view, enormous damage to the trust of the country in the political class. It's got stuck in Parliament, it's got wrecked in Parliament, Brexiteers would say. Huge frustration on both sides about how things have panned out. And for Boris Johnson, that is job number one, beyond all else. It's almost by hook or by crook. That has to be achieved in order that people can believe politicians when they stand up and make promises. Now, for many of our audience, the idea that they can believe what Boris Johnson says absolutely, with no question and no scintilla of doubt at the back of their mind, well, maybe that's a bit of a reach at this moment. It's perfectly clear for him he's going to say it as often as he possibly can, because that is his reason for being. But, a cautionary note, Theresa May came in, and although she articulated lots of things she would want to do, the reason that she was in office and her number one task was also to get Brexit done.
And as you say, with with an almost impossible parliamentary situation.
Yes.
So with that in mind, the signals he'll give out with appointments to top jobs will be even more important than they normally are. So
Yes.
what are you expecting?
Well, I think obviously there's like frenzied speculation. It's Westminster's favourite guessing game, who's up and who's out in a new administration like this. But I think the one thing that I think will be fulfilled is that big jobs will have either convinced Brexiteers or people who have been avowedly, publicly, overtly committed to the need to leave at the end of October. Now, beyond that, Boris Johnson's team are trying to build a balanced cabinet. You know, they will have people who are on the Remain side of the argument. Perhaps Amber Rudd might stay in her job. Matt Hancock, for example, who's the health secretary, would absolutely still be in a big job around the cabinet table. But the overriding sense of what they'll be trying to show is that they mean it about sticking to that deadline. And it is, you know, people close to Boris Johnson believe if he can't stick to that deadline, well, then they might be done.
New Chancellor?
New Chancellor, a lot of money on Sajid Javid, who up until now has been the Home Secretary. He's done other jobs previously. He's very heavily tipped for that job. But, you know, reshuffles very often go awry. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. One piece doesn't fit, and then suddenly the whole picture looks differently. And we probably won't know until early this evening.
Okay, so that was my other question, which was timings.
Yes.
When do you expect some news? And, you know, are we going to see people arriving here within the next couple of hours?
I think before too long we'll see Boris Johnson leaving to go to the Commons to do the less pleasant bit, the getting rid of people that he doesn't want to be in his cabinet. And then I think they will start to confirm cabinet appointments. But it may well not be till 6, 7 o'clock tonight. The ambition is to have the full team ready in place, to have a cabinet meeting here at 8:30 tomorrow morning, and then a statement in the House a couple of hours after that. But, you know, we will see. This is the first test. They want to show that he's on it, that he can deliver, that not that he's shambolic or struggles to make decisions. We'll see.
We'll see. Thanks very much, Laura.
Pleasure.
Talk again later on. I'm going to go back to Westminster, where Sonia and Laura have been waiting patiently to talk to us. And given what Laura was telling us there, Sonia, I'm just thinking, your thoughts about some of these key appointments, what would you be thinking at this point?
Well, I think what Boris Johnson is clearly doing is trying to send a signal that you know, he's very committed to what he said in his speech, that it, you know, it wasn't quite do or die, but it was very much no ifs or buts. And so that's what he's doing with his top team. And to some extent, it's kind of a reunion of people who were involved with the Vote Leave campaign back in 2016. So when you look at the people he's got, that are rumoured, that are tipped for the big jobs, it's people like Dominic Raab, Priti Patel, these sorts of names, Michael Gove. But there are real questions that hang over the capability, I think, of some of these appointments, particularly someone like Priti Patel, who was sacked not so long ago for essentially kind of running a bit of a side operation when she wasn't Foreign Secretary but was going around conducting meetings, apparently on behalf of the British government. So I think there will be real questions that face him around, you know, it's very clear what he's trying to do, but what is the capability of this top team going to be to do something that's, after all, incredibly difficult that Theresa May didn't manage to do in 3 years?
I would disagree with quite a lot of that. I think that actually, if you look at the appointments that are rumoured to be taking place, you've got Sajid as Chancellor, who was a Remainer, Matt Hancock, who was a Remainer also, Oliver Dowden, you know, who's been absolutely crucial in planning the first 100 days. These are incredibly capable, experienced people from the Remain camp, and you know, it shows, I think, that Boris Johnson wants a broad base of support in his government, which indeed he'll need if he wants to get something through Parliament.
Do you think that we'll have a full cabinet in place by tomorrow morning? Is that realistic?
I think so. It depends, I mean, as the other Laura was saying earlier, on whether things go awry. I mean, as things often do. I remember during reshuffles, there were best laid plans, and then they can go very wrong as soon as you have someone who doesn't want to move. But if things go well, I think it is realistic that by tomorrow morning we will have most of the cabinet in place.
And it will be interesting, I think, to see what happens with the Jeremy Hunt showdown. So apparently Jeremy Hunt has sort of indicated to Boris Johnson that he doesn't want to move from the Foreign Office, and essentially, if it's not a more senior job or as senior a job as Foreign Secretary, he's either staying put or he's going. Which is interesting, actually, because it's a similar tactic that he tried with Theresa May very successfully when he didn't want to be moved from being Health Secretary. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happened to that, and we'll see how determined Boris Johnson is to stamp his own mark on the cabinet, or is appearing to be Big Tent and having his main rival, you know, in the cabinet more important to him.
Just a final thought to you both. Just the contrast, really, between the confidence and the energy, if you like, of that statement, which is typical Boris Johnson, and the fragility of the government, really, given the parliamentary arithmetic. So there is a disconnect there, surely.
Absolutely there is, and it's all very well and good for Boris Johnson to stand on the steps of Number 10 and sort of deliver that rhetoric, but at the end of the day he's got just a working majority of 2 at the moment. That could go down to 1 with next week's by-election, so he's facing even tighter parliamentary arithmetic than Theresa May, an even tougher job, as it were. So he can say he can deliver a better deal, he can achieve with the EU what Theresa May couldn't and get that through Parliament. Actually, I think the reality over the coming weeks is going to look very different.
I think he's been very clever with the domestic policy that he announced. This is Tory red meat, and even with the majority of 2, that's still a slight majority, and no Conservative MP is going to turn around and say they don't want more police on the street. So I think he's actually being quite calculated in what he's putting out from a domestic point of view. On the Brexit perspective, I mean, it's a hope, and I think he'll show by his government that he's trying to get a varied team in place and put himself in the best possible place to get that through.
Good to talk to you both, Sonia and Laura. Thanks for waiting patiently as well to talk to us earlier. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go